Welcome to Control Room A here at Sweetwater Studios. You guys know we talk a lot about getting great source tone of all your instruments and vocals, as well as your pastor's microphone for your worship mix. And I'm excited about this video today because we are joined by Jonathan Pines with Rupert Neve Designs. You guys have heard of this legendary company and their products. We're gonna talk about capturing really quality source tone, leveraging tools like DI boxes, some of the preamps and channel strips, as well as a primary source expander. What is a primary source expander? It's really cool. You probably have never heard it broken down into simple terms. We're gonna cover all of those things in today's video, and we're gonna give you some practical tips for just capturing that quality tone at the source so that when you're behind a mixing console, you're removing so much of the headache and the busy works in that mixing process so it sounds great at front of house as well as for your church's online mix. So let's go ahead and dive in. Jonathan, where are we right now? Give us a little more context of the studio.
Okay, we're in Sweetwater Studio A. This is an amazing room. I want to thank everybody here and Sean Dealey, who's the chief engineer here, and Jason Peets for letting us come in and do this in this beautiful space. But here is a wonderfully designed studio with our flagship console, great monitoring, wonderful outboard gear, and wonderful staff here.
Love it. And what's your role at Rupert Neve Designs?
I'm Director of Strategic Operations. What I do in practicality is I help think about the next generation of products we're going to make. I interface a lot with our higher level clientele because I'm a working producer engineer who makes records still. So I can talk the talk with anybody, and I can talk about how their gear might be used, not only with our stuff, but with other things. I also go and train wonderful places like Sweetwater on how to best communicate best practices with our gear to their customers.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to dive into these different tools that you guys have here. So let's go ahead and jump into the video.
So what is a DI box? Okay, at its most simple level, it's doing an impedance transfer and balancing of the signal. So why is that important? You have unbalanced, think tip sleeve, cables going into things like keyboards, bass guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, and drum sets, electronic drum sets. Why is this important? Because it allows, through a combination of either electronic or transformers, electronic circuitry or transformers, you're able to balance the signal and provide the right load, make it acceptable to a mic preamp. And that's obviously a simplification, but the idea is you need to be able to take this unbalanced load, balance it, take it from high impedance to low impedance, because a microphone preamp wants to see a low impedance source.
Got it. Why do some instruments have the unbalanced output versus some of them do have an actual balance? Like if I pull, let's say from like a Helix guitar pedal has usually like a stereo balanced XLR outputs, but maybe some other guitar pedals might be an unbalanced output. Is it like typically a hardware limitation?
No, typically that's cost and or power. It's hard to do that with battery power.
Okay.
It's hard to make a balanced drive with battery power. So typically when you're looking at pedal world, probably that's going to be coming from how that pedal board is working or how that pedal is working.
That makes sense, because most like an acoustic guitar pickup output is usually like powered by a battery, like a 9-volt battery.
Yes.
Which is why it's unbalanced. You need to go into a DI and have it converted.
And also, it's really high impedance typically. Impedance is measured in something called ohms, and it goes all the way up to mega ohms. So low impedance sources, you generally want a 10-to-1 minimum ratio between source and destination on impedance, because if you have things like single coil guitar pickups or piezoelectrics in acoustic guitars, if the load is imbalanced or if it's too high to too low, it's going to roll off the high and low frequencies. It's not going to transfer all of the sound. One of the ways of doing that with a direct box, a properly designed direct box, has a very high impedance load. So it's not seen as a load. It doesn't affect the tonality of the instrument. So a high impedance load is really important for a direct box, i.e. you want to see something over 1 mega ohm. You know, for example, in our direct boxes, we look at something that is in the 2 to 3 mega ohm. So there's just plenty of room there.
Before we continue on with the video, a quick word from our sponsor, the Worship Ministry School Accelerator Program. You may not know this, but in addition to all the YouTube content we're creating here at Churchfront, we also partner with local church worship and production ministries to help them hit their ministry goals. Over the past 4 years, we've worked personally with hundreds of worship ministries around the globe. We've helped churches navigate upgrading their worship tech, building better systems to grow their team of volunteers, as well as address any knowledge or skill gaps required for modern day worship ministry. When you join the Accelerator program, you get access to our entire library of online, on-demand courses, and you get unlimited access to our team of Churchfront coaches. To learn more about joining the program, click the link below this video to apply and schedule your free strategy session today. Now let's get back to the video.
We're actually really proud of the R&DI family, and it's now grown to a family of 3 different products. And one of the things we're particularly proud of is Rupert has always believed in high quality sound and actually got into high quality sound to improve the sound at his church. And it's actually a number of products came out of his desire to get better acoustics and a better sound in his church. His parents were missionaries, and they left the UK to go to Argentina where they were missionaries, and then he got called back for the war and actually came back and entered the service at a slightly too young age. Then after the war, and he was involved in radio and transmission stuff during in the war, but then after the war started a mobile broadcast service and was very involved in his church in trying to get higher quality sound during the services, both for music and also for speaking. And one of the things that's very cool about these, and virtually everything we make, none of our microphone preamps have a pad on them, and none of our direct boxes have a pad on, except one, and I'll get back and explain that. So if you have something like a Nord lead or a Moog Subsequent 37, it's gonna put out something like plus 10, plus 12 dBu. That's a lot of level. Almost every other direct box on the planet's gonna require you to engage a pad. But when that person goes from a very loud patch to kind of a quiet, soft patch, you're not going to necessarily have enough gain at that point because you've padded everything down. So that's a really nice feature of these. The other kind of unusual thing we have on here is a speaker mode. And what that allows for is you can actually put it between the amplifier and the speaker itself. We're all used to taking a DI from the instrument, and often now these days from a pedal board, but there's a lot of sound that's coming from the amplifier itself. From a bass amplifier or guitar amplifier, you're getting a lot of tonality because there's equalizers in there, there's tone controls, there's often tubes, there's often output transformers, there's a load, how it drives the speakers, all of those things go to why a lot of guitar players are like, it doesn't sound like it is when it's in front of my amp, because you're not actually taking all of those pieces. DIs are also very important these days because a lot of people use modeling amps, and so they want a clean, great signal that then can be modified in multiple different ways. We also make a stereo DI, which is cool. You can mount 2 of them in a rack mount side by side, in any standard rack mount, and it'll fit in 1 rack space. We just came out with a brand new product, which is the R&DI 8, which is 8 separate R&DIs in 1 rack mount package. You might wonder, are these passive or active DIs? And what is the difference between those? So these are active Class A transformer-based DIs. So in other words, they have a Class A input circuitry that's really high impedance. The reason for the high impedance is to not load down the signal, not make your Telecaster, for example, or your bass guitar sound small. So these actually run on phantom power. They require 48 volts of phantom power. So arcing back to your question of why aren't there balanced outputs on things with 9-volt devices? They don't have enough current and they don't have enough voltage typically to drive correctly. So one of the cool things about this is we put 8 in 1 rack mount, and they're 8 separate ones. Each one requires phantom power. They're entirely independent of each other, and they have obviously a ground lift on the bottom, which is a pin 1 ground lift, which is how to solve grounding problems. There's another ground lift on these on the front, which is an isolation, so it isolates the 8 from each other. You can isolate 1 or all of them physically from each other. And again, that goes back to that situation where you have a piece of gear mounted in a rack and maybe it's leaking a little bit of bad things, and it could be transmitted via the rack rails. In other words, it's electrically conducted because it's touching these things. And that's a way of taking the case out of it. So in other words, it completely separates the DI from the case itself. So there's no way anything touching it is going to provide any interference. And then the only thing that's different, and I'm going to contradict myself, I said, we don't make anything with a pad. Well, actually, we make one thing with a pad, which is these. The reason we do that is not for any instrument. It's literally for Pioneer DJ mixers, which put out plus 29 dBu, which is an insane amount of level. That's 15 to 20 dBu more than any instrument ever. With any instrument, with any of our DIs, you would never need to use a pad. That's really the only situation.
The point, again, being to maintain that true tone that these instruments are generating. You want to make sure you do that. The impedance or the unbalanced to balanced conversion properly before you just start plugging things into the stage box.
Think about it in a really simplified way of a hose. Do you want a tiny little hose which doesn't transfer much water? Or do you want a big hose that transfers a lot of water quickly? You may have different applications where you want one or the other. If you want to wash dishes, you can't do it with a dribble. You need a certain amount.
Yeah, and that's what we talk about with a lot of our mixing, whether it's for front of house or for broadcast. If the original source tone coming into your channel strip on your mixing console doesn't have all the information there, it's not mic'd properly, the gain's not set properly, you're not getting all that data. It's just, no matter what you try to do at your mixing console, it's just not going to sound good when you're outputting it.
Jake, that's such an excellent point, because a lot of times you're fighting things that you don't need to be fighting. If you get the best capture with a great microphone, with a great direct box, and have high quality microphone inputs and high quality gear, you don't have to equalize them as much, you don't have to compress them as much, and it's much faster to get a mix. And that's a thing that I'm always trying to teach people, is start with a good source, fix it at the source, you're going to get much better sounding mixes much quicker.
Sometimes that gain staging happens not only at the mic preamp level, but managing gain through your mix, and then even how it's outputting to your amplifiers for your speakers. One of the most common things we help churches fix sometimes when we're working with clients is their mixing console is like, oh, your master fader is down to
you're running your master fader here. And you need to be running it up here.
Yeah, because these faders are supposed to be fine-tuned cuts, maybe boosts
well, they have,
right?
They're logarithmic, so they have their best resolution is in here, not down here.
There's a good chance if you're running your master fader that low, check out your amplifier level, after it's outputting from the mixing console, and it's probably just cranked way higher than it needs to, and that's preventing them from getting that proper gain at the source of a channel strip. Practically speaking, again, when we're looking at this gear and the use cases, with a mono DI like this is what I'd use for my acoustic guitar rig, or any other mono source, right, where you have one output from the instrument. Then we have a stereo DI. This is, again, for keys especially. If you do have a stereo guitar rig, if you can run something in stereo, run it in stereo. That 8-channel DI would be a great application for, we actually have the electric drum set, the Elisa's Strike, and it has 8 outputs or something like that. Let's talk about some of the other products you guys have, the channel strips. What are some use cases that you're seeing churches apply those?
Generally, this is a way to provide a much higher quality microphone preamplifier, equalizer, and compressor, and possibly additional tonal options than what's built into a typical mixing console. For certain things, you want to have the best sound quality. Maybe that's the pastor, maybe that's the praise team, maybe that's a soloist, maybe that's the primary vocalist. All of those things, you may want to get the best possible sound quality and have more of a finished studio sound. So that's where having a channel strip is. And historically, we've made very high-end channel strips, and by high-end, I mean $4,000 channel strips. One of the things we're extremely excited about is this product, the Newton, that just came out literally this month, which is, for us, one of the first times we've been able to reach into a little bit more affordable marketplace for a channel strip. You have a high-quality mic preamp, in this case with 66 dB of gain and 60 dB steps, and then plus or minus 6 dB trim here. You have a variable high-pass filter. What does a high-pass filter do? Cuts out low-frequency mud. And these are variable, so you can, instead of being in a fixed position, you can run it anywhere from 20 hertz to 250 hertz. So you can find the place where you want to remove the low-frequency mud. Because, Jake, as you know, trying to get a good mix is about fitting everything together. It's not necessarily about the way it sounds individually, it's how the whole thing works together.
Yep.
So the next thing you then see is an equalizer. And this is switchable. On the low end, it has 2 frequencies, and on the high end, it has 2 frequencies. In the mid-range, it's sweepable from 220 hertz to 7 kilohertz. And that's the broadest range of sweep we've ever put on any of our products. This is a peaking EQ, so it's designed to carve and get at certain frequencies. Then following that is a compressor. And this is a VCA-based compressor, which is designed to do no harm, i.e. it is designed to sound good in almost any setting in it, and we're getting some wonderful early feedback from people about how great it sounds on things like vocals and mixes. On that, you have a threshold, you have a release, and you have a makeup gain control. Now, then you've got something that you don't see on a lot of things. We have something that is exclusive to Rupert Neve Designs, which is our silk texture control. You can have none, you can have silk red, or you can have silk blue, and it's completely adjustable here. Okay, so what is this? It's a way of providing vintage texture and vibe or coloration by saturating the output transformer and controlling how you do it. We were able to provide different harmonics. It's not a distortion device, it's changing the harmonic structure. And we can provide different forms of second and third order harmonics that tend to have different frequency weightings. So it's not an EQ, it's going to measure flat the whole time. Dynamically, it's going to produce more high frequency and mid frequency harmonics for silk red, and for silk blue, more low frequency harmonics. But it's not actually an equalizer. It's a form of saturation, absolutely. Okay. Properly done, that's what they're referring to as harmonic saturation. And anybody who's used a larger format console knows, and particularly an analog console with transformers in it, the more you push that, the more it glues. Like, for example, this console we're sitting in front of, which is our top-of-the-line product, this runs on 90-volt rails. That means that it has a near infinite amount of headroom. This is actually the only console in the world that has stepped-down transformers in the output. It steps down from an internal operating level of plus 36 dBu to plus 24 to match to the rest of the world. Talking about saturation, as you push a console, it doesn't necessarily go into distortion. It just gives you more of a glue. You're getting more harmonic structure, and that's that classic large console sound that everybody's trying to chase.
Yeah, and it's helpful for people because a lot of us too are just using Waves plugins that emulate a lot of these concepts, and it's nice to. I think a lot of us can hear that characteristic of these plugins, but now to understand a little bit more about the actual physics of it, it's like, okay, that makes more sense. Let's say I wanted to invest into one of these channel strips and put it in our maybe first our live music context at my church. When you're doing the analog to digital conversions, I'm trying to get it into like a more prosumer digital mixing console.
Right. So you would go line output of this in probably in this case, for example, if it's into an X32, you would go line input from the -6 output and take that straight in at line level. You're bringing it up to mic level at that point in time, up to line level. You're using your equalizer, you're using your compressor, you're probably using some silk texture, and then at that point in time, it's full level, and you're not going to do as much in the console.
Because I'd want, really, from the microphone itself, the microphone cable
would go
running
straight,
analog into the channel strip.
So it would come straight off the snake at the front house position and go into that.
Yeah, then I guess the other thing, too, when I think about practical church application, especially if your church is getting into just doing more recording of your own projects at your church, maybe you're building out a studio, it seems like this is one of those pretty valuable tools, especially if you are investing in great microphones. Pairing a great microphone with a great channel strip, which has the great preamp, adding in the saturation, and then we would want to make sure you have a quality interface. So you're not, again, because you want to maintain the quality all the way through. You don't want to use like a $100 interface coming out a $2,000 channel strip.
One of the things that we did think about and design for this product is to be able to use it in all phases of production. If you're making a record, for example, you can use it on, say, kick and snare. You can then use it on vocal, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, keyboard overdubs. You can use it on the mix bus. You can even use it as a hardware insert. We were really trying to get a piece that didn't have just one use. It could be all the phases of the process. Now, this is a piece of gear that is an essential part of a lot of toolboxes for audio engineers. What does it do? This is the 5045. It's called the primary source enhancer. Okay, so a lot of people feel like it's a magic box. Anytime you see an NFL, NBA, or Major League Baseball game there's a really, really, really good chance that every time they cut to someone on the field, they have one of these on there. Because what is it doing? It's allowing you to get anywhere from 2 to 20 dB more gain before feedback. Wow. And anybody who works in live sound, at the smallest level from a 2-input mixer and 1 speaker all the way up to giant consoles like this, know that gain before feedback is what you're always chasing. Because when you have that feedback under control and not problem, you can worry about mixing instead of worrying about things feeding back or the PA running away. So one of the things this does is it allows you to get, very simply, you have a time constant here, which is the red knob, and then you have depth control and threshold control. And unlike a noise gate or sliding notch filters, which is the way a lot of people choose to control feedback, this is always looking to see whether there is a sinusoidal activity, and it's in fact using phase cancellation. So it has a very broad threshold range, and it doesn't do that thing when you put a noise gate on something that's feeding back, and as you talk into the microphone or as your performer talks into the microphone, it breaks through and you hear little bits of feedback coming through and it goes boing, boing, boing. Mm-hmm. Literally, you can be talking into it, lean into a stage monitor, and you'll hear no feedback. It's really a magic box.
This is why I love spending time at Sweetwater and talking with folks like Jonathan here, because I just learned so much, and I hope you guys have learned a ton as well, especially about these pieces of gear that maybe you've heard of, maybe you've seen the digital version of a plugin of one of these tools, but to actually understand from first principles level, from an electrical engineering going on, what exactly is happening.
You're providing such a service to the community about explaining this stuff instead of it being a mystery.
Yeah.
And you know, I coming up as an engineer, I was always annoyed when someone would say, "Oh, you know, I'm not going to tell you how I do things because everybody does things the same way." Well, A, they don't, and B, we really actually want to know how to do stuff at the end of the day.
So, of course, you guys can head on over to Sweetwater, check out all the products that they carry with Rupert, Neve. And again, these ones are no-brainers. I've seen these DIs in a lot of the churches that we do tech tour videos at. You guys have probably seen these as well. People love them.
I mean, obviously, you can go to rupertneve.com. We have a lot of information there. You know, I think Sweetwater has an enormous database of information and how-to videos. Yep. And, you know, when people are frustrated, again, when I started, there wasn't the internet. Now there's such a great way to get information. And you want to try and go to trusted sources. Yep. And that people that explain well, because basically anybody can be a YouTuber now. And it doesn't mean they know what they're doing. Yep. So you want to go to trusted sources, go to places and people that actually know what they're talking about. I think that's the most important thing. If I'm speaking to people who are starting their career or helping out on the weekends, don't be overwhelmed. Learn one thing at a time, get better at one thing. If every week you can do one thing better, by the end of the year, you're pretty awesome. And that's a great place to be. Well,
thanks so much, guys, for watching this video. Hope you found it helpful. Leave a like button, share it with your friends in ministry. And like I said, check out sweetwater.com for all the products that we mentioned here. We'll see you next time.